Hello, One Great Earth. My name is Dan. I hope you are well. Got a bit to get into today. Air pollution becoming the second leading risk factor for death, and the fact that almost all plastic ever created is still around. We'll talk about recycling, plastic recycling, my experiences working at a landfill or two. I've had a lot of jobs. I've worked a lot of strange places. Well, it's strange because, it's not something you would frequently hear that somebody, worked on a landfill. So this is from UNICEF. Air pollution accounted for 8.1 million deaths globally in 2021, becoming the second leading risk factor for death, including for children under 5 years. Comprehensive new report details health impacts of air pollution, which has moved ahead of tobacco and poor diet as a risk factor for death. Boston, New York, June 19, 2024. Air pollution is having an increasing impact on human health, becoming the second leading global risk factor for death, according to the 5th edition of the State of Global Air SOGA report. The report, released today by the Health Effects Institute, HEI, an independent US-based nonprofit research organization, found air pollution accounted for 8.1 million deaths globally in 2021. Beyond these deaths, many more millions of people are living with debilitating chronic diseases, putting tremendous strain on healthcare systems, economies, and societies. Produced for the first time in partnership with UNICEF, the report finds that children under 5 years old are especially vulnerable, with health effects including premature birth, low birth weight, asthma, and lung diseases. In 2021, exposure to air pollution was linked to more than 700,000 deaths of children under 5 years old, making it the second leading risk factor for death globally for this age group after malnutrition. A staggering 500,000 of these child deaths were linked to household air pollution due to cooking indoors with polluting fuels, mostly in Africa and Asia. A global health concern. The new SOGA report offers a detailed analysis of recently released data from the Global Burden of Disease study from 2021 that shows the severe health impacts pollutants like outdoor fine particulate matters, PM2.5, household air pollution, ozone, and nitrogen dioxide are having on human health around the world. The report includes data for more than 200 countries and territories around the world, indicating that nearly every person on Earth breathes unhealthy levels of air pollution every day, with far-reaching health implications. This is important right here. Every person on Earth breathes unhealthy levels of air pollution every day, with far-reaching health implications. This is serious. There is no place safe to run from pollution. Not just air pollution, there's all forms of pollution, but there is no place safe to escape from pollution. It's impossible. There's so many beaches that were pristine that are now covered in oil. And that is the fate of all beaches of this world, to be covered in oil. More than 90% of these global air pollution deaths, 7.8 million people, are attributed to fine air pollution, including more ambient particulates and household air pollution. These tiny particles, measuring less than 2.5 micrometers in diameter, are so small they remain in the lungs and can enter the bloodstream, affecting many organ systems and increasing the risk of non-communicable diseases in adults like heart disease, stroke, diabetes, lung cancer, and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, COPD. According to the report, PM2.5 has been found to be the most consistent and accurate predictor of poorer health outcomes around the world. Let's take a look at that here. can see the Midwest here. It's no coincidence that around the same areas where greenhouse gases and these particulates are in the atmosphere, you're seeing higher temperatures. No coincidence. Climate change is real, and we are seeing devastating effects of what happens when climate change enhances our weather, enhances our climates. People had it so wrong and joking, because that's all that they would have is jokes saying that climate change is a hoax or climate change isn't real, while getting angry. The anger is that part of the brain that knows it's true, knows that climate change, we were given 5 years on climate change. I believe that. It isn't just that we had 5 years left, we had 5 years left to change everything before. Now, I am saying, due to our carbon budget and the amount of carbon that's put into the air that isn't qualified or isn't recorded, such as every time an oil depot is exploded, every bomb is detonated. These aren't attributed to climate change. Militaries, armies, they don't have to report about their environmental damage that they've caused. War. But what are we to do when we have corporations and manufacturing that's still churning plastic and other means at very good paces? The fact that more people are dying from unhealthy air, and they don't know it inside their house how unhealthy the air is. That's coming. We hope that our State of Global Air report provides the information and inspiration for change, said HEI President Dr. Alina Kraft. Air pollution has enormous implications for health. We know that improving air quality and global public health is practical and achievable. Air pollution and climate change. PM2.5 air pollution comes from the burning of fossil fuels and biomass in sectors such as transportation, residential homes, coal-burning power plants, industrial activities, and wildfires. These emissions not only impact people's health, but also contribute to the greenhouse gases that are warming the planet. The most vulnerable populations are disproportionately affected by both climate hazards and polluted air. In 2021, long-term exposure to ozone contributed to an estimated 489,518 deaths globally, including 14,000 ozone-related COPD deaths in the United States, higher than other high-income countries. As the world continues to warm from the effects of climate change, areas with high levels of NO2 can expect to see higher levels of ozone bring even greater health effects. For the first time, this year's report includes exposure levels and related health effects of nitrogen dioxide, including the impact NO2 exposures of the development of childhood asthma. Traffic exhaust is a major source of nitrogen dioxide, which means densely populated urban areas, particularly in high-income countries, often see the highest levels of nitrogen dioxide exposures and health impacts. This new report offers a stark reminder of the significant impacts air pollution has on human health, with far too much of the burden borne by young people, young children, older populations, and low and middle income countries. This points sharply at said Dr. Alavi Pant, HEI's head of global health, who oversaw the SOGA report release. This points sharply at an opportunity for cities and countries to consider air quality and air pollution as high risk when developing health policies and other non-communicable disease prevention and control programs. Children's health. Some of the greatest health impacts of air pollution are seen in children. Children are uniquely vulnerable to air pollution, and the damage from air pollution can start in the womb, with health effects that can last a lifetime. For example, children inhale more air per kilogram of body weight and absorb more pollutants relative to adults while their lungs, bodies, and brains are still developing. Exposure to air pollution in young children is linked to pneumonia, responsible for 1 in 5 child deaths globally, and asthma, the most common chronic respiratory disease in older children. The inequities linked to the impact of air pollution on child health are striking. The air pollution-linked death rate in children under the age of 5 in East, West, Central, and Southern Africa is 100 times higher than their counterparts in high-income countries. Despite progress in maternal and child health, almost every day, almost 2,000 children under 5 years die because of health impacts linked to air pollution, said UNICEF Deputy Executive Director Kitty van der Heijden. One inaction is having profound effects on the next generation, with lifelong of health and well-being impacts. The global urgency is undeniable. It is imperative governments and businesses consider these estimates and locally available data and use it to inform meaningful, child-focused action to reduce air pollution and protect children's health. Progress is being made. The SOGA report provides good news as well. Since 2000, the death rate linked to children under 5 has dropped by 53%, due largely to efforts aimed at expanding access to clean energy for cooking, as well as improvements in access to healthcare, nutrition, and better awareness about the harms associated with exposure to household air pollution. Many countries, particularly those experiencing the highest levels of air pollution, are finally tackling the problem head-on. Air quality actions in regions like Africa, Latin America, and Asia, such as installing air pollution monitoring networks, implementing stricter air quality policies, or offsetting traffic-related air pollution by moving to hybrid or electric car vehicles, are all having measurable impacts on pollution and improving public health. While progress is being measured, more can be done to stop air pollution from continuing to outrank other health ranks as the biggest threats to millions of lives. Air pollution has become the second leading risk factor for death, both in terms of total global population as well as in children under 5 years old. The top 5 leading risk factors for each definite category are: ranked number 1 total global health population is high blood pressure. In children under 5 years, it's malnutrition. The second ranked global risk factor for death is air pollution, and for children under 5 years old is air pollution. It's the only factor that is shared with children and the total global population regarding their health. This is a big deal. And we were talking about secondhand smoking 2 decades ago. What happens whenever, you have all these schools that are built up around these factories? Not good. Very, very good article. UNICEF, June 18th, this article is from. 8.1 million deaths globally in 2021, as air pollution could become the number 1 risk factor for death on the planet. Plastic recycling reality. I might be so bold as reminding you that I do not use a script, and I generally do not know what I'm going to talk about before going live. I just know that I have some articles and some ideas, and I'm quick to go live. Typically, though, I would want to have 3 articles but these two articles are going to be rather large, especially this one from Quillette. Recycling plastic is a dangerous waste of time. The recycling industry and the world at large has yet to fully reckon with a bombshell study that dropped last year. By now, you probably know that plastic recycling is a scam. If not, this white paper lays out the case in devastating detail. To summarize, amid calls to reduce plastic garbage in the 1970s and 80s, the petrochemical industry put forth recycling as a red herring to create the appearance of a solution while it continued to make as much plastic as it pleased. Multiple paper trails indicate that industry leaders knew from the start that recycling could never work at scale. And indeed it hasn't. Only about 9% of plastic worldwide gets recycled, and the US manages only about 6%. Read that again. Only about 9% of plastic worldwide gets recycled. As bad as this is, the situation might actually be much worse. According to an emerging field of study, the facilities that recycle plastic have been spewing massive amounts of toxin called microplastics into local waterways, soil, and air for decades. In other words, the very industry created to solve the plastic waste problem has only succeeded in making it worse, possibly exponentially so. While the study that kicked off this new field received some press coverage when it appeared last year, the far-ranging import of its findings is yet to be fully integrated into environmental service science. If the research is even closer to accurate, and to date it has not been substantially challenged, the implications for waste management policies across the globe will be game-changing. For a start, no one has fully documented the massive amounts of microplastics at issue here. As I'll demonstrate below, not only do plastic recyclers appear to be a major source of MPE contamination, they may very well be the #1 source of primary microplastic pollution on the entire planet. So, from an environmental perspective, recycling plastic could be doing far more harm than good. Even some environmentalists are coming around to this view. From a legal perspective, MP pollution poses an existential threat to the plastic recycling industry itself. Changing case law precedents make it easier than ever for individual entities like recyclers to be held liable for environmental malfeasance. And this threat couldn't come at a worse time for the sector. It's already reeling from market forces wreaking havoc on its business model, in addition to a series of PR disasters turning public opinion against it. Finally, if plastic recycling really is a net negative, what then? Humanity still faces a dire plastics waste problem. We're making 400 million metric tons of this non-biodegradable material a year, nearly half of which is in the form of single-use plastic items that go directly into the trash, and we're on track to hit 1 billion? 1.1 million metric tons by 2050. Policymakers need to do something, but what? That's a billion. 1.1 billion metric tons. That's strangely written. Why would they write 1100 million? Who writes 1100 million instead of 1.1 billion? Move that decimal over. Policymakers need to do something, but what? The reflexive answer from environmentalists is make less plastic. That sounds reasonable, but on closer inspection, it lacks widespread feasibility. Vital industries like healthcare and agriculture would grind to a halt without the benefit of single-use plastics, not to mention the ubiquity of reusable plastics in just about every aspect of modern life. Realistically, with the dream of recycling our way out of this problem rapidly fading, the less than perfect yet practical solution of waste to energy, that is, burning plastic garbage as fuel, needs to be reevaluated. Best laid plans. Facilities that recycle plastic, known in the business as reclaimers, sort items by type and color and then feed them into shredding and grinding machines, reducing them to small shards. Before being melted down to create recycled plastic, the shards are vigorously washed to remove dirt, labels, adhesive, and other foreign bodies. Reclaimers then filter this wash water and discharge it. into either open water sources or municipal water treatment systems. The process involves heavy machinery like Nilmives that subject plastic items to enormous mechanical force, generating a lot of dust. It's logical to hypothesize that this dust contains high levels of microplastics, usually defined as particles between 5 millimeters and 1 micron in diameter. Particles smaller than 1 micron are considered nanoplastics. Enter Arena Brown, a young grad student at the University of Birmingham who wanted to use her recently earned Master of Sciences degree in Sustainability and Environmental Studies to investigate real-world problems. After the study she conceived and helmed briefly made her micro-famous last year, Brown described her philosophy as a scientist to a podcaster. I think one of my bugbears is when academia stays solely within academia and doesn't really leak into industry or public knowledge or anything. So she decided to investigate the potential for a plastic recycling facility to release microplastic pollution and possible filtration remediation effectiveness. In interviews, Brown has repeatedly noted that she and her team were fortunate to have been granted admittance to the study site at all, because recyclers have a reputation for secrecy and distrust of outsiders. More than that in a moment. In exchange for access, the research team granted the UK reclaimer where the study took place anonymity, which to date it has maintained. By chance, the UK reclaimer, a relatively new state-of-the-art facility, was upgrading its water filtration system at the time, so Brown's team took microplastic samples from wash water discharge points from both before and after the new installation. Even with the new filtration system, the study found that the plant's discharged water contained upwards of 75 billion particles of MPs per cubic meter, far exceeding the team's expectations. To put these results in perspective, pre-filter, about 13% of all the plastic garbage entering the facility was leaving it via microplastics in the wash water. Post-filter, that figure was about 6%. Extrapolated yearly, that comes to 2,933 metric tons of microplastics discharged pre-filter and 1,366 metric tons discharged post-filter. More troubling was the size of the microplastics. The team measured for particles as small as 1.6 microns. In some samples, they found 90% of particles were under 10 microns the size of a human blood cell, and 85% were under 5 microns. Ingesting particles smaller than 10 microns is known to be hazardous to marine life, and scientists believe it to pose risks to humans as well. Further, Brown believes that numerous particles smaller than 1.6 microns, many of which are nanoplastics, probably eluded measurement altogether. We logically know, obviously we didn't in this study, prove in this study, but we logically know that where there would be a lot of particles under 1.6 microns as well that we didn't know, she told an interviewer. Finally, the team found high levels of microplastics in the air inside the plant, and 61% of those particles were smaller than 10 microns. Particles on this site can enter human lungs and cause disease, a problem that came to light about 20 years ago among workers in nylon flocking plants and became known as flock workers' lung. Since neither the suspected nanoplastics nor the atmospheric microplastics were included in the study's total discharge volume, the authors believe the results probably represent an underestimate. I was incredibly shocked, Brown told The Guardian. It's scary because recycling has been designed in order to reduce the problem and protect the environment. This is a huge problem we're creating. Given the plant's state-of-the-art credentials, Brown doubts that other reclaimers around the world are doing a better job at preventing microplastic pollution, nor could she foresee any technological fix. To filter and capture such small particles, reclaimers would need to install full-fledged wastewater treatment machinery, an economically unfeasible option that, in many cases, will still fail to address the atmospheric microplastics. Crunching numbers. While decrying the absurdity of plastic recyclers producing the very pollution they were designed to foresaw, none of the study's press coverage went as far to call for a moratorium on reclaimer activity. Most took a stance similar to that of the Washington Post, which under the subhead, keep recycling wrote, despite the study's findings, experts emphasize that the answer isn't to stop recycling. The story then quotes Judith Enck, a former senior EPA official who now heads the advocacy group Beyond Plastics. This is not a major reason why we have such a significant problem with microplastics in the environment, but it's potentially part of it, and there is an irony to it because it involves recycling. Wait, irony sure, but not a major reason? According to what data? Enck does not say. To check her claim, I decided to explore the matter a little further. In a new story on the conservation website Manga Bay, one of the study's co-authors, Dione Allen makes an informed guess about the amount of MPs the world's reclaimers might be disgorging. This means that global plastic recycling could be producing about 2 million metric tons of microplastic waste each year. Okay, that seemed like a good place to start. According to the business directory, there are 3,065 reclaiming plants in operation around the globe. 2 million divided by 3,065 comes to 653 metric tons from each plant per year, or about half what the anonymous UK plant was thought to be producing after the new water filtration installation. Keep in mind that most plants probably don't benefit from such recent technology. Also keep in mind that this figure excludes particles smaller than 1.6 microns. On the other hand, we don't know the size of the anonymous UK facility. It may be a particularly large one with corresponding higher MP output. Also, the samples from Brown's study may have been outliers, or their methodology may have been skewed, or other mistakes may have been made. In truth, the estimate that 6 to 13% of the total amount of plastic entering the facility exits in the form of microplastics in the wash water does seem a little high, even given the harsh mechanical friction the plastic garbage undergoes. With all the variables in mind, 653 metric tons of MPs coming from each plant for a total of 2 million metric tons per year globally seems like a fair ballpark estimate. Let's work that out. Now, how does 2 million metric tons compare with other sources of microplastics? Environmental science divides microplastic pollution into two broad categories: primary and secondary. Primary microplastic pollution occurs as a byproduct of the wide variety of polymers we use in everyday life: laundering and wearing synthetic fabrics, microbeads and cosmetic products, vehicle tire abrasion, city dust from the soles of shoes, fishing gear used in the ocean, road markings, paint coatings, marine vessel coatings, athletic field turfs, pellet losses during transportation, and sludge from sewage treatment plants used as fertilizer. Secondary microplastic pollution happens at a slower pace, from MPs leaching in the soil and groundwater from plastic items in landfills, illegal dumping of plastic garbage in oceans, and random litter blowing around on land or floating in the sea. The amount of secondary MP pollution is difficult to estimate because no one is sure how much illegal dumping goes on. One study put the total amount of primary microplastic pollution at 3 million metric tons a year. Another study estimated 3.2 million metric tons a year. In other words, if my math is correct, plastic recycling alone may very well generate 2/3 of the total amount of primary microplastic pollution on the entire planet from those sources mentioned above combined. That sure sounds like a major reason why we have such a significant problem with microplastics in the environment to me. Dirty work. One astonishing aspect of the story is muted response it elicited from the recycling industry. When an Australian broadcaster asked Brown how the UK plant reacted to her groundbreaking study, she had this to say: "So we didn't actually get a response from the plastic recycling facility once we published the research. I think we are really lucky in the first place to gain access to take samples because a lot of the waste industry, and within that the plastic recycling industry, is so closed-doored and quite secretive, both outwards towards the public and within the industry. Apart from a few quotes from a petrochemical types in the news coverage, the industry hardly reacted at all, and what little it did say was flimsy." In a short brief, the Association of Plastic Recyclers countered that Brown's study failed to mention that reclaimers in North America typically route their wash water into municipal water treatment plants that solve the problem by capturing the microplastic runoff. While it's true that many recyclers channel their wash water to treatment plants, even the best of those facilities can only capture about 90% of microplastic particles, while less efficient plants in developing countries perform far worse. In any event, this solution makes no sense because even if water treatment plants captured 100% of all MP's particles, they almost always ship their microplastic infused sludge byproducts to farms where they are used as fertilizer. So the microplastics would enter the environment through soil. Agricultural contamination of this sort has already resulted in a lawsuit in Britain. The brief then adds that nearly all North American reclaimers use a process called dissolved air filtration to remove microplastics from washed water. Yet the brief offers zero evidence to support this claim. In fact, a literature search reveals that DAF has seldom, if ever, been proven to filter microplastics. According to a 2024 paper, studies evaluating the efficacy of DAF in removing MPs under various circumstances such as MP density, size, shape, and composition have not been conducted. As a result, it is now difficult to provide correct and thorough observations for this technology's elimination of microplastics. The sad truth is that unlike paper, glass, and metal recycling, the science underpinning plastic recycling has always been, at best, questionable. From the beginning, the industry's own chemists repeatedly told them it wouldn't work. Most types of plastics can't be recycled at all, and the ones that can be recycled become more toxic during the process. The reality is that plastics can only be recycled, or more accurately, downcycled once, rarely twice. The white paper concludes. It then becomes trash just like virgin plastic. Recycling merely delays its journey to a landfill or worse. In recent years, the industry has tried to change the narrative by touting so-called advanced recycling, sometimes called chemical recycling, but so far none of this technology has panned out either. Even some of the industry's own trade journalists say it will never work under any circumstance. For decades, recyclers got away with these failures because up until 2018, they were selling almost all of their trash to China and calling it recycled, even though in reality tons of it were being incinerated, landfilled, and dumped in waterways. The reclaimers were basically skimming the most profitable plastic items off the top and then exporting the rest. In addition to exposing plastic recycling's inherent flaws and pretty much destroying its business model, the China ban also pushed the industry into some more devious behavior. To understand this behavior, a little backstory is necessary. Recycling enjoys a green, eco-friendly brand identity that can distract the fact that it's an offshoot of the waste management business, a sector with long-standing and notorious ties to organized crime. While the vast majority of recyclers are honest, law-abiding citizens, sketchy things to do still happen with some regularity. In 2017, New Jersey, home to some of the world's first reclaiming facilities, issued a report exposing mob corruption in recycling, a practice partly made possible by a lax regulatory framework designed to attract private investors when the industry was young. Other U.S. states experiencing similar corruption include California and Arizona, West Virginia, Minnesota, and Louisiana. As recently as last year, underworld elements infiltrated Germany's Eurobis, one of the world's largest recyclers, and stole millions in precious scrap metal, a swindle that may involve the company's CEO and at least 2 board members. When China closed its doors in 2018, developed countries in the West resorted to diverting millions of tons of garbage to Southeast Asia countries, often whether they wanted or not, a practice that unleashed environmental havoc in the region. A web of organized crime groups, shady middlemen, and legitimate recycling companies use falsely labeled containers, circuitous shipping routes to obscure points of origin, and a garbage disguised as other products to fool those nations into accepting our trash. One of the biggest culprits is California, paradoxically because of its strict green laws. A 2011 state law requires California cities and counties to recycle 75% of their waste, but does not specify how to accomplish this goal. Many officials there feel they have no choice but to export their way to compliance. Blood in the water. Thanks to decades of primary and secondary microplastic exposure, every human being alive now teems with this stuff. They found in every human organ, including the brain, the placenta, testes, breast milk, and sperm. Scientists are still trying to figure out the health repercussions, but MPs are thought to induce endocrine endocrine disruptions that lead to reproductive problems, cancers, and inflammatory and immunity diseases. Yeah, this stuff is causing low birth rates, period. Number one low birth weight causer in the world, microplastics and microplastic contamination. Nanoplastics and microplastics have been blamed for playing a role in plummeting fertility rates and in spiking cases of cancer among younger patients in their 30s and 40s, the latter of which some physicians are now calling an epidemic. Given this growing body of science, Brown's landmark pilot study, the studies that followed it in, and additional studies surely in the works could all blast open a pathway to devastating legal consequences for plastic recyclers. Good. The sharks smell blood in the water. Trial attorneys are already salivating and sharpening their knives. Risk managers, the experts who advise insurance companies, are worrying openly in print. And insurers currently fleeing the sector in droves may grow even more reluctant to write policies for these facilities. Unfortunately for plastic recyclers, legal precedents set by ongoing PFAS forever chemical litigation offer a paradigm that will be easy for plaintiffs' attorneys to follow. Litigation targeting large chemical companies that manufacture PFAS, per and poly chemicals, is a juggernaut currently steamrolling through courtrooms all over the US and the world. These substances, called forever chemicals because they don't naturally break down in the body, include some 15,000 compounds used to make products more resistant to water stains and heat. They've been linked to cancer, liver conditions, birth defects, and other health problems. Legal scholars predict that payouts in these lawsuits could well exceed $200 billion price tag paid by Big Tobacco in the 1990s. A great deal of overlap exists between microplastic pollution and PFAS pollution. According to a risk management company, some microplastics are made of PFAS, such as
polytetrafluoroethylene,
PTFE, and polyvinyl fluoride, PVF. Some plastic products, such as synthetic textiles, can be coated in PFAS. Some PFAS might be added to microplastics during manufacturing, such as polyvinyl chloride. One type of PFAS, known as polymeric PFAS, can break down into microplastics in the environment. A key innovation of PFAS litigation involved using site-specific pollution identifiers to hold large manufacturers liable for their chemical products. Many PFAS lawsuits began as investigations into military bases where periodic fire drills spread flame retardants containing forever chemicals into the environment. Some see a similar roadmap for litigation against plastic manufacturers. The plaintiffs in these cases are using innovative legal arguments, particularly related to public nuisance theories of harm, to successfully bring these cases forward. According to the white paper, we think these new legal strategies will open the door for plastic litigation. An Industry Week article adds, given the ubiquitous nature of microplastics in the environment, regulatory agencies and plaintiffs alike may cast a wide net when identifying potentially responsible parties, but even before we have robust microplastic regulations, plaintiffs are already using existing laws to find ways to target plastics in the environment. from citizen lawsuits to challenging claims regarding sustainability and recycling as they related to plastics. It won't take long for ambitious plaintiffs' attorneys to realize they can use reclaiming plants as a pathway to enormous financial settlements from deep-pocketed plastic manufacturers in the same way that colleagues used military bases to target PFAS manufacturers. Unfortunately, unlike petrochemical companies, recyclers can't afford to write multi-billion-dollar checks. In fact, the plastic recycling industry is in such bad financial shape that it's been reduced to begging governments to guarantee its markets. To cite just one example, at a European industry conference last year where many grievances were aired, Caroline van de Peer, managing director of the Belgian-based recycler firm RAF Plastics, called for regulators to extend the obligations to use recycled materials. Further, so-called extended producer responsibility laws and regulations, popular rallying points for industry lobbyists, usually contain language that guarantees and safeguards markets for recycled plastic. Just incinerate it all. So if we can't recycle our way out of the plastics garbage deluge, what's the alternative? Most environmentalists say the obvious answer is to tackle the problem at its source by manufacturing less plastic, particularly the single-use kind. Solutions include enacting bans on single-use plastic bags and unrecycled single-use plastic food service products, runs a typical bromade. Leaving aside the question of whether or not large-scale single-use bans are even politically feasible given the enormous influence of the oil and petrochemical industries, such as solutions contain two fatal flaws. First, single-use accounts for only 50% at most of all plastic manufactured. So even if somehow all of it were banned, we'd still have a significant problem. And second, the medical world alone would grind to a disastrous halt without single-use plastics. Realistically, unless civilization plans to return to life in grass huts, plastics will remain an essential pillar of modern life for the foreseeable future. With what appears to be the imminent departure of plastic recycling, waste-to-energy solutions will move up a notch on the list to viable policy options. Burning garbage for fuel has been happening around the globe at scale for many years, especially in places where room for landfilling is scarce, like Europe and Japan. The waste-to-energy option achieves three positives. It solves a rapidly growing plastics disposal problem. It displaces the need to extract other petroleum fuel products. It is far more renewable than coal, oil, or gas because much of it is biomass. Further, the need is practically limitless. According to the Reuters investigation, the cement industry alone could incinerate every scrap of plastic garbage produced in a year. Because burning trash creates CO2 greenhouse gas, environmentalists generally hate WTE, but this is a complex issue since landfilling garbage leads to huge emissions of methane, which has 28 to 36 times more impact on global warming than carbon dioxide. In other words, there is a case to be made that burning trash for energy produces fewer greenhouse gas emissions than landfilling. Such a case hinges on how clean WTE incinerators burn, and this remains a point of contention. Depending on which side you believe, WTE incinerators produce carbon dioxide, somewhere between the rate of coal, the dirtiest burning fossil fuel, and diesel, and the cleanest burning one. In any case, with regards to greenhouse gas emissions, there's widespread agreement that WTE options fall somewhere between the spectrum of fossil fuels. In essence, this argument boils down to weighing the risk of greenhouse gases against the risk of microplastics in our bloodstreams. To me, the threat of MPs seems far more immediate, especially given the likelihood that avoiding WTE options will do little to curtail the CO2 emissions. Most growth in new greenhouse gas emissions occur in developing countries that are burning coal for power, in developing countries that are not about to stop developing anytime soon. Those incinerators are going to burn something. why not solve at least one problem by switching them from coal to trash? Proponents of WTE and environmentalists bicker endlessly over whether burning biomass garbage is carbon neutral. The answer to that question lies beyond the scope of this essay, other than to say it's starting to feel like a debate over whether to place the deck chairs on the Titanic. We may be past the stage where we can allow the perfect to be the enemy of the good regarding the pressing global issue. At least one forward-thinking environmentalist thinks likewise. In September of last year, Arena Brown appeared on the podcast Rubbish Talk. One of the show's two hosts, Alasdair Meldrum, who possesses impeccable green credentials, said the following about microplastics and recycling. I used to deliver the Institute of Waste Management's Waste Smart course, and it was all about waste hierarchy and sustainability. And one of the things I used to do was to make a point was I always used to say to people, we should stop recycling plastics. We should just incinerate it all. We should just capture the energy because it's effectively oil. Recover the energy. We're wasting our time recycling. Because of the challenges you've got in the UK is everybody assumes we can recycle plastics really well. And in actual fact, it's probably one of the hardest materials to recycle we've got. It's light, it's hard to collect, it's expensive to collect, and really expensive to process. It's got a lot going on against it in terms of actually recycling. And if you add that into that about what we were saying about the microplastics, in the end we're potentially creating a big issue there, then maybe we do need to look at that a bit more closely and say, is it worth more doing all that effort in terms of recycling plastic? The waste to energy guys love me at the moment for saying that. Yes, laughter seems to be the only bearable response here. The alternative is terminal despair. Brown's study contains a strong element of Greek tragedy, like where was I? Yes, laughter seems to be the only bearable response here. The alternative is terminal despair. Brown's studies contain a strong element of Greek tragedy, like Oedipus, and trying to avoid our fate, we have only made it inevitable. Instead of evading plastic pollution, we have helped to inject plastic toxins into every living thing on the planet. How we extract ourselves from this tragedy needs to be debated, but the fate of plastic recycling shouldn't be. It deserves to be sent straight to the same graveyard as prohibition and integrated busing, two other grandiose 20th century ideas that didn't just fail miserably, but also made the problems they sought to fix demonstrably worse. This is an article by Mark Celia, freelance journalist who has covered the healthcare and pharmaceutical world since the 1990s. Gives you a lot to think about, because we have plastic recycling that has been hammered into my head since I was young. I imagine most of you as well would have had the same experiences. It's madness to say that, okay, plastic recycling doesn't work. Less than 8% gets recycled. And maybe 8% of all plastic ever created is still around today. These are alarming numbers because we're finding plastics everywhere. You know how many times that I've seen undersea diving ROVs, remote controlled vehicles, go under the water and they find plastic under the ocean floor? It's something that you would expect now, but at first you're wondering, what is that odd shape in the distance? It turns out not to be of life. It's plastic. It's a bag, it's a pillow, it's something that doesn't biodegrade even under immense pressure, temperature changes, fluctuation, and currents tearing it apart, creating further microplastics. So all the trash that's, garbage island, trash island, plastic island, whatever people would call it, you're only seeing a small percentage at the top of the ocean that is in the bottom. And also, it's not just this floating raft. It comes down and drips down like a huge honey drop into the ocean. And there has to be a huge just glob of plastic and trash that's just bobbing in the ocean. This is something that we should be able to see, but it's too complicated in trying to get a shape on it because it's rather formless, because all the plastic, everything sticks together after a period of time. You have all kinds of adhesives and all kinds of syrup sticky things that would happen that would cause a lot of the plastics to stick together too. In the ocean and eventually going down, it would take microplastics, talking about microplastics here, nanoplastics, particulates so fine that they would take 100 years to go from the surface of the ocean to the bottom of the ocean, just like all the other particulates. So eventually, plastic particulates will create no food for the bottom of the ocean. Instead of particles that are food-related biomass, like a fish that was eaten above and its carcass floats down and just bits go everywhere. We're seeing some really hard times, because not only are we seeing the hottest year on record, followed by the hottest year on record, we're seeing record amounts of plastic being made. We're seeing record pollution being broken everywhere. And every time we see another beach that was pristine, covered in oil or plastic, it's just that much more closer to what I would imagine is a breaking point of society as a whole being able to bump up against all this plastic. There's a lot of cultures that just can't be supported any longer because the plastic infestation is so bad that rivers and lakes, ponds, you have this stuff everywhere. You have fish eating into little bits of it, and those fish get eaten by humans, and those humans use the bathroom, and eventually that goes out. Hopefully. But in reality, a lot of it's going to stay inside your body and your bloodstream and your stomach and your other organs, find ways into your other organs. They are microplastics. You're not going to be able to feel them. So little and fine that you're breathing them in. That's not something that you could really put a stop to. You can try wearing a mask, but as I'm quick to point out that people would still assault you if you wore a mask today, even after everything that we've been through. As a society, they would still assault you and harass you for wearing a mask. Even though that, hey, you're worried about pollution, you're worried about plastics, you're worrying about small fibrous bits of pollution end up getting into your lungs, into your bloodstream. This is where's that article? Okay. This is the article from a year ago from The Guardian, where this researchers found the level of microplastics released in the water amounted to 13% of the plastic processed. Arena Brown, a lot of the same names. So it just goes into more of the same, because you can put a filter that's finer on the end so the particulates get covered, or that they get stopped from going into the, but they're just going to hit the screen of whatever filtration and make them so smaller to get through that screen. There's no way to filter out microplastics. Once they get to a certain particulate, that's it. They're in the wild and there's no way to scoop them out. There's no net that you can get. It's embarrassing. All the same time that we just went so headfirst into plastic, even that the industry is knowing its pain, its ghost that it leaves behind. You throw away plastic, aluminum cans, tin cans, all that. Well, let's say soda can. You take a can of soda. It has plastic lined on the inside of it. So what they are is they're like little bags, and they inflate whenever the liquid, the fluid is poured in, and it stays up to the sides of the can. Very thin membrane, but it's there still. So every can of pop that gets disposed of has plastic in it. It's roughly around the same size as a can. Can't recycle this. There is no such thing as recycling. This is a myth. Recycling was created by the petrochemical and plastic companies pushing forward, but by doing recycling, we're actually making plastic contamination worse for the environment, because the way plastics are recycled, you're having microplastics that are exponentially bumping up in amount of numbers. I'm not going to read this article. It's more than a year old, but that's not why I'm not going to read it, because it shares a lot with what we just went over here. And Quillette, Frank Celia. I hope you are doing fine. If you're just now joining us, we're just talking about recycling plastic and its myths, I guess you could say. You haven't already, please like the stream, subscribe to the channel. It helps me out immensely and gets me motivated to keep putting out more climate-related videos like this. Either I go into a wildfire or I go into an iceberg, follow it around. I do a lot of different things related to the planet. That's why I call it One Great Earth, because it is global. There are no borders. Everything is included, and everything can be discussed, especially whenever you have global percentages of recycling being so dismal. That why are we still doing it? In the hopes that it'll still work? We know it won't work any longer. We know the system does not work, but we're still going to push ourselves into recycling, when actually it would be better for the environment for these plastics to wind up whole in a landfill. It's hard to say, because it's, on one hand, the contamination is there, and on the other hand, the contamination is so much worse and so much more finer. And these companies have been running for years, decades. So you got to think the millions of pounds of plastic that have gone through these places, that a fraction of that waste winds up in water, drinking water. Water that you would use for your pets and animals, water that would be used for agricultural purposes. And now we're seeing plastic just everywhere. China stopped taking our recycled plastic cubes in 2018. Ever since then, what are we going to do? Stop creating as much plastic. But how do you really police that? There's a lot of companies that would have to have a lot of detail in writing, a lot of responsibility to document like every single bit of plastic that they produce, every polymer. And that would slow down the industry, but is that such a bad thing? Because we're asking at the very least to slow down the industry. And if checks and balance systems are needed to be implemented to make sure that companies are not pushing out more plastics than they need, nothing will happen. Because just like over 90% of plastic has never been recycled because it's still around here today, over 90% of people really don't care about the environment until it really starts to mess with them. And I'm telling you right now, there is no safe place from pollution. There is no safe place from climate change. Both already exacerbate existing systems and environments. We're not looking at the end. I'm not being a doom scroller because I've worked in industries where we had to handle lots of waste, which was a very large landfill, one of the largest in the States. And I'll tell you, I was only there for, was it 2 years? 2 summers? And it's insane. It's madness. The amount of waste coming in constantly. People are lined up at the gates waiting to get in to dump some stuff. They'll have like 9,000 pounds in their trailer or more. They drive it up to the top of the landfill and they dump it, and then big machines come around and they stomp it, which that will add to microplastic being in the air, because every time it stomps comes up, even though it's flattening it down, it's pushing it into the ground. When it lifts up, it's lifting a bunch of microplastics off, ripping it off right off the products themselves. So what do we do here? It just seems like any path that we go to for responsible plastic manufacturing is false. There's a false narrative there all the time, because it relies on plastic recycling actually being something worth doing, which it isn't, which we've known for a long time it isn't. Now we know very much so because of this article, because of this white paper. It's the Center for Climate Integrity, the fraud of plastic recycling, how big oil and plastics industry deceived the public for decades and caused a plastic waste crisis. You see people protesting out there for the environment. This is what they know. This is what they've had to deal with and struggle with for years. Now, if you, on the other hand, are having trouble struggling this because, hey, I just filled up a garbage can full of trash that was all single-use plastics, it's not your fault. Okay? It's not your fault. Industry leaders have known about these dangers for years and have done and said nothing. Nothing. Sound familiar? Why is it that every time one of these industries gets into a bad way, we're like, well, they didn't know, or even if they did know, there's nothing that's going to happen. There's no class action lawsuit that's going to... The only thing that happens that matters, that matters a damn, is discovery. And who would you go through? What would you do? Who would you try to sue? Who would you try to make sense of this climate justice? The people that are largely responsible for a lot of the plastics that we're seeing production are probably already dead because it's been so long. This is the Fraud of Plastic Recycling white paper. Authors Davis Allen, PhD, Chelsea Lindsley, Naomi Spolman, Alyssa Joel, and contributors Megan Matthews, Charlotte Marceau, and Jan Dell. This looks to be exactly like, I didn't see this before. So this is like the plastics industry sold the public on disposability, and then we sold them on incineration and landfills. So how much of society has been changed radically due to plastics being involved in everything? You're curious about that? I'm going to put this It is a PDF, but I'll put this. Oh wait, it's already in the article. The article is in the description, as well as my Patreon. If you have a moment, I would greatly appreciate if you go to my Patreon. It is linked in the description of this video. I create climate-related videos for YouTube, and if this is something that you see helpful, I'm spending a lot of time going through sources, going through stories, trying to find the right ones for the right time, the right day, and ones that go with each other, especially thematically. So it's a lot of work, and I do love it. This is more than a hobby for me. So if you are available and you have a Patreon account, please, there is a free membership as well as a $5 membership for Headliner, where I will read out the names out of everybody that has signed up. And as of right now, I have to read names out: Sean, Danny, Sarah, and one more name. Ashley. So Danny, Ashley, Mashawn, and Sarah, thank you so much for signing up. I got my first Patreon sign up for the $5 tier, and I am just wildly excited because I never thought that I would be able to make any money on this, especially ever since my AdSense account was suspended indefinitely by YouTube without route of appeal being able to go. I'm not able to appeal. So it's either create another channel, which would be bypassing their systems, so that account will be suspended in the same way anyway. So my other alternative would be like going to Twitch, and I just prefer the way YouTube organizes videos. The back end of Twitch I never really liked. The way that you do headlines is different than what I do on YouTube. Usually it's like 100 characters, and as soon as I know the headline is 100 characters exactly, I know it's good to go. That's a little bit of my OCD there. I try to go live as often as possible, but sometimes it's like, there needs to be 3 more characters. How am I going to reword this to better fit the title? So the title is a bit of the content as well, because what you see in once you see in the headline is what I'm going to be getting into in here. I don't bait and switch. I don't use questionable sources. I try to keep everything above water, your head above water. So I'm not reading anything that's too far out above my pay grade. This is 37 pages with appendices. Petrochemical companies, independently and through their membership and leadership in plastics industry trade associations, have created and funded front groups to promote plastic recycling as a false solution. These are evidence of campaigns. Plastic pollution is one of the most serious environmental crises facing the world today. Between 1950 and 2015, over 90% of plastics were landfilled, incinerated, or leaked into the environment. Plastic waste is ubiquitous. From our rivers, lakes, and oceans to roadways and coastlines, it is in the air we breathe, the food we eat, and the water we drink. One study estimates that humans ingest up to 5 grams, or the equivalent of 1 credit card worth of plastic per week. Some of the largest oil and gas companies are among the 20 petrol companies responsible for more than half of all single-use plastics generated globally. ExxonMobil, for example, is the world's top producer of single-use plastic polymers. Underpinning the plastic waste crisis in a decades-long campaign of fraud and deception about the recyclability of plastics. Big oil and the plastic industry, which includes petrochemical companies, their trade associations, and the front groups that represent their interests, should be held accountable for their campaign of deception, much like the producers of tobacco, opiates, and toxic chemicals that engaged in similar schemes. And the majority of plastics cannot be recycled. They never have been and never will be. Plastics are part of a sector known as petrochemicals. And, you know, like, one thing I learned as well is that plastics are considered lumber. So when you're shipping it, these are thousands of different types of plastics, each with their own chemical composition and characteristics. The vast majority of these plastics cannot be recycled. As of 2021, the U.S. recycling rate for plastic is estimated to be only 5 to 6%. Mechanical recycling is the process of recovering plastic waste through mechanical processes, including sorting, washing, grinding, melting, and reprocessing to form a new plastic product. Advanced recycling, also referred to as chemical recycling, is an industry-created term used to describe a category of technologies that break plastics down to their chemical components, usually through exposure to extreme heat or chemical solvents. Some types of advanced recycling may produce materials capable of being reprocessed into new plastic to plastic. However, the majority of these processes produce waste or fuel which do not qualify as recycling. As such, plastics cannot be meaningfully recycled through either method. Let's try to find some good news in this article. You know, I don't think there's going to be. The plastics industry sold the public on disposability. Throw them away, just throw it away. It'll never end. Amazing article. Amazing article that led me to this. Draw to plastic recycling. This is going into more information that I wanted to share, because this is about the campaigns from petrochemical companies that have gone for years saying that you need to recycle, you need to recycle, you need to recycle. Well, recycling is a scam. Who benefits from recycling and why? Not economically competitive with virgin material, virgin plastic material. You can't recycle or downgrade the material and make something of quality. Quality is not going to be there again for the repurposed plastic. Always just return right to incineration, mechanical recycling. It just keeps coming back to it. The major petrochemical companies and trade associations include ExxonMobil, Shell, Chevron Phillips, Dow, DuPont, Lindial, LyondellBasell, Eastman, Occidental, the Society of Plastics Industry, the Plastics Industry Association, the American Plastics Council, and the American Chemistry Council. Recycling is not real. Conclusion. By deceiving consumers, policymakers, and regulators about the availability of plastic recycling, petrochemical companies have ensured the continued expansion of plastic production, which has led to a plastic waste and pollution crisis for communities across the country. The costs of managing and cleaning up plastic waste are largely borne by municipal and state governments, and those costs are projected to increase exponentially in the coming decades, given that plastic waste generation in the United States is expected to decrease from 75 million metric tons in 2019 to more than 140 million metric tons by 2060. Not going to be able to breathe on this planet anymore. If not for the big oil and the plastic industry's lies and deception, because there has been lies and deceptions, over 70 years of lies and deception to the general public about the facts about recycling and what they knew early on that could have changed the course of history and environmental and reshaped the landscape so they wouldn't be just the only hills that we have now are landfills. If not for the big oil and the plastic industry's lies and deception, municipalities and states would not have invested in plastic recycling programs and facilities, many of which would have been shut down due to foreseeable economic losses. The industry not only misled municipal and state agencies to believe that plastic recycling was a viable solution to plastic waste, but also discouraged them from pursuing other more sustainable waste management strategies, waste management reuse bans, alternative materials in favor of plastic recycling. Fossil fuels and other petrochemical companies should now be held accountable for their deliberate campaigns of deception and the resulting harms, much like tobacco and opiate companies that employed a similar playbook. Based on the growing body of evidence, municipalities and states are likely to pursue litigation which could put an end to the industry's deception, make the companies pay for the devastating harms they have caused to communities, open the door to real solutions that are currently out of reach. Now this goes into the key players and what they're done. BASF, if you live anywhere within 4 miles, I think, of like a BASF production plant, you're living in a sacrificial zone. Sacrificial zones can be found on ProRepublica's website. Pretty big, damning piece, especially when you type in your own zip code and realize you're screwed. You're just more of the similar companies that are members of the Association of Plastic Recyclers have also served on the board of NAPCOR, the Plastic Recycling Partnership, and Keep America Beautiful. Keep America Beautiful, where you see the signs on freeways that say this was kept, was cleaned because of this. Appendix. We don't even have plastic ban bags in most states, and those bags are everywhere. I'm telling you. You haven't seen pollution, you haven't seen plastic pollution until you've really gone to a place that takes it like a landfill. Plastic everywhere. trees, it doesn't matter what it is, it has plastic on it. It has plastic bags just like wrapped around it constantly. And the bags rip and tear, and they create microplastics like that. So without banning plastic bags for grocery shopping, we're really screwing ourselves up. There's no way to reuse these because, especially for like food, people reusing bags for food. Like, these bags are not clean products. People use them like they're reusable bags. They're not. They're single-use plastic bags that you throw away. That's how it's been for 60 years. The industry always just reuse them. Okay? Where do they go after you reuse them? Same place as everything else that you throw away. Except if you recycle it, it goes into a place that discharges the water into another body of water that has a great deal amount of microplastics in it. And we're only starting to understand this now after 60 years of doing it. Alright, we're just now really getting into social consciousness that recycling doesn't work. Recycling has never worked, and recycling will never work. You literally have the people that make all the plastics that are saying it's not going to work. Who else are you going to believe besides everyone else that's saying it too? There is no such thing as recycling plastic. There is only pollution. The kind of plastic waste that I've seen would make you tremble. I don't want to use the word tremble, but just thinking about the amount of waste I've seen, plastics, just garbage dumpings. We used to work for County Road Commission. You see a lot of waste being dumped around Detroit too. It's insane, and people do it all the time. Illegal dumping all the time in Detroit. It is so bad. Animals, you have furniture, you have trash, garbage, waste. It's ridiculous. And part of the dumping is including, and with the single-use plastics that you develop, you want to do the right thing, right? You want to recycle, right? Except recycling is false. It is a scam. I've read this article, which, here it is. Recycling plastic is dangerous waste of time. Now, the part that I was curious about was why it labels this dangerous. And it's because it creates more microplastics than if you just threw it into a landfill. Plastic recycling creates so much waste in the air, the people that are working in there, in the water systems, and that gets out. And plastics everywhere. You haven't seen what I've seen, just how much plastic can take over an environment and completely change it, make everything sick. Great article. I keep saying article, I'm sorry. White paper, this white paper here. Go to G letters, what are these two? Evidence of campaigns. There you go. Wow. Streaming for almost an hour and a half. I thank you for your time. I appreciate your viewership. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe. Subscribe to the channel. Helps me out immensely and keeps me motivated in putting out climate-related videos like this every day. I do not have a set time of where I stream. It's usually just abrupt and all over the place. Usually around 5 p.m. I seem to stream is where my analytics point to closest, but that's 5 p.m. Eastern. But again, like I can go live at all times because, like I said before, I find a bunch of articles that I want to talk about, a bunch of news, and I'll put it together and I'll go live. Because I know if I wait, I'm going to find so much more content that I should be utilizing on the channel. So I have to do it quickly, not quickly. So I'm trying not to read too fast. Because a couple of times I've read way too fast that people were wondering what I was doing. Which, you know, trying to be professional, but where's the fire, you know? People want to be able to hear you and understand it. And rewinding on rewinding on YouTube is not as easy as it sounds. You go back 30 seconds and you lose your place and you got to find your place again. And you keep missing the part and you don't know where it is. I digress, I'm sorry. Reading all this, I know it probably might seem hopeless because we have all of this danger around us. We have all these systems that we know that are just, why is that even still around? And recycling is one of them. And as I mentioned before, I do have a Patreon account, so One Great Earth. What happened is that Google suspended my ads account due to shocking content, and I am not able to appeal to get it back online. So I'm going to continue with the YouTube channel, and with Patreon, I should be able to, I got my first $5 paid tier today, and that makes me very, very excited of the future of this channel and the content that I'm going to be bringing you. Plastic recycling reality. When I was a kid, and I used to always used to take all my bottles, my pop bottles, and all the plastic bottles to the corner store to recycle them. And I would buy something else that's single use, like a candy bar or another pop. So the only recycling is in the actual product itself, because you bring the empties and you leave with what's filled. And there's no way of reusing plastics for liquids. A lot of these plastics, especially like water bottles, you can't, after you drink all the water in the bottle, you can't add more water to it and drink out of it again. It's not hygienic. And the water bottle doesn't really want to do it. It'll break down. So, as for the big part about appealing with Google is that it's based on how your account type is. I tried to change my account type from an organization to an individual so I can appeal as an individual instead of being a business, because now I have to have an actual business to appeal. I have to have like One Great Earth LLC to be able to appeal this. They don't want to change my account type because if they change my account type, I'd be able to appeal in that way. They don't want me to appeal. My accountant is too shocking for YouTube, apparently. I might have made some swears before when I was upset or angry, and maybe the transcription picked up on this. I'm trying to behave. I feel like most of what I'm looking here doesn't need to have swear words to enhance. All right. Been a pleasure. I thank you for joining me here. Thank you for liking the stream, subscribing to the channel. I will see you again soon. Thank you.